Okay, welcome to the screenwriting panel for the Con Carolinas filmmaking track. We have a talented group of people here. If we could just do brief introductions. I'm Bill Mulligan, indie filmmaker, high school teacher out of Sanford, North Carolina.
I'm Christine Parker. I run Sick Chick Flicks Productions and the Sick Chick Flicks Film Festival, and I'm in Apex, North Carolina.
I'm Angela Giddings. I'm an independent filmmaker with Sick Chick Flicks and an independent author. I'm out of Carborough, North Carolina.
Director, writer, producer here, CEO of my productions in Charlotte, North Carolina, also a published poet.
Hey, I'm Paul Barrett. I'm an independent producer. I've produced 2 features, 2 documentaries, innumerable numbers of commercials and industrial projects, and also a published author with 3 novels and a 4th one on the way. 4 novels and a 5th one on the way.
Hey, you lose track after a while. So can everyone just talk a little bit about what experience you've had in screenplays? For myself, I've written a bunch of shorts, some of which have been filmed, a lot of them in partnership with Christine Parker. She and I worked together on, two feature films?
Let's see.
Fix It in Post and A Few Brains More?
A Few Brains More, yeah.
Yeah.
You did a little bit on Forever Dead, too.
Yeah. You were letting people do whatever they wanted. And I've got a couple of feature projects that are in various stages of development hell.
Written a few films, 5 feature films, a couple of those with Bill, and we've done more than a dozen short films. I've written some of those. Bill's written some.
I've written 1 feature film that's kind of in development hell and 3 short films, one of which was for the 48-hour challenge. The other 2 are for
48.
For the anthology we're planning with Sick Chick Flicks.
Yeah.
Those count.
Mm-hmm.
You add those in and we're probably closer to 2 dozen.
Probably.
So I've done writing from all kinds of spectrums, from poetry, comics. I have a feature that's in pre-production right now. I also write for marketing. I actually do marketing management and stuff. So also been on writing teams before for TV shows as well.
I wrote the scripts for a number of those aforementioned commercials and industrial films I talked about. I've written 4 feature screenplays, 2 which were spec scripts requested, 1 by an actor, 1 by a director I worked with. My buddy Steve and I came this close to getting an episode on a BYU show called Dwight in Shining Armor. I mean, to the point where they were talking to costumers and getting everything ready, and at the last minute, one of the network executives was like, "Nah, we're not going to do it." So that hurt.
Yeah.
that was a stab in the heart. But yeah, like everybody, got them out there developing. All it takes is one person to say yes. So
Right.
They're out there making the rounds.
Well, I mean, I wanted to see this panel as a way of giving people some tips and advice, those who want to get into the business and everything. And you brought up something I was going to mention, so I might as well mention it now. How do you recover from disappointments? And I think all of us have probably had some. That project that looked like it was going. I mean, I've never heard of one getting that close. I mean, that's got to be torture.
Yeah, it was. It was literally the production manager called and said, "Hey, we're going to be sending out contracts. You guys are going to be able to join WGA, all this stuff." And then the executive, 2 days later, called and said, "So I'm the one who's got to give you the news." I'm like, no,
that's never good.
No, yeah, and the way you recover from it is, really, I think it's the way you recover from sort of any, setback or rejection. First, you cry on your partner's shoulder for about 5 minutes. I will neither confirm nor deny that I did that. And then you just, you're bummed for, well, in my case, it was probably 2 days. My productivity went down the toilet. And then you just sort of, you pull yourself back out and go, well, again, that's a no. It only takes the one yes. And like my director buddy said, he said, "Welcome to the business." Because it happens more often than you would think, apparently.
Now, I know, Christine, you and I came very close to that. To having a project pretty much just go away.
Oh, we did. Yeah. But we survived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got kind of lucky there, but
Well, I mean, we basically weren't willing to give up. We were going to rewrite the whole script right there and then.
Yeah.
If we had to, but we were going to continue on no matter what. Fortunately, the scripts that we've written have been for ourselves mostly. I know you've written a few for other people, but the main reason I became a screenwriter, I became a director, was because I wanted to see my movies made. So
I was just gonna ask
yeah.
Asha too. That and Jason can agree with me on this. We start to notice that an awful lot of the filmmakers in the short film festival are writer directors.
Yep.
And I wonder,
writer actors too. A lot of actors.
Yes.
Writing.
And I just wonder how many of them, most people think directing is what everyone wants to do, but the hunch that I get from talking to a lot of people is they're a director because nobody else wanted to make their movie that they wrote, and they really like the story.
Yeah.
And maybe it's easier for a writer to learn to be a director than for someone to learn how to write a good story. That seems to be something I'm convinced you're kind of born with, or at least you're born with a talent that you can nurture. Yeah. Am I wrong about this? Does anyone disagree with me that writing is just like playing a musical instrument? I can't, other people can. I can write, some people can't.
I think you definitely have to have a certain innate talent and willingness to do it, but I think like any craft, it can be honed.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
As long as you start with a certain number of building blocks. But yeah, I do think there are unfortunately certain people that no matter how much they try, they just can't do it. Just like no matter how much I try, I don't think I could ever play the drums because I just don't have that kind of rhythm.
Yeah.
So
well, I think there's some people believe in a formula to writing, and if you follow that formula, you'll be successful. People that I think have a natural talent for it don't necessarily always stick to that formula, but are still successful because they have that natural talent. So I think there's a couple of different ways you can go about being successful as a writer, depending on what skills you already have.
And I think a lot of it is most of us who make movies love movies, and we watch movies, and I think we kind of absorb those rules almost by osmosis. Like I've written some scripts, and then I went back after reading something. This is what every script should have, but and it shows you the beats, and I go back and see, and it's like without having meant to, my script more or less kind of follows that because that's the logical progression for a film story. Not that I was saying, oh, it's page 7 now I need the big twist.
Right.
It's just that after watching so many
and used to it.
You kind of get used to the whole idea. But that brings now, Angela, you and Paul, you've both written novels. Describe the big difference between writing a screenplay and writing a short story or novel, because one of the questions everyone has is, why do so many great books, why are they turned into terrible movies?
With like the novels and things, you have to describe what's going on, scenery and all that for your audience. Whereas with film, that's the job of the camera. It's through the eye of the camera. And that's why I like writing screenplays. I also like writing novels, but the description is where I have trouble with. So it actually works out for me with screenplays. I like writing dialogue. I like setting up plot.
The chase.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. I mean, I personally like writing tons of description. John Hartness will be happy to tell you my books could probably use 20,000 words of editing just because of that. But to your sort of other question, Bill, why so many books become not great screenplays is there's a much bigger inner world in a book that you can get away with. You can delve into the psychology of your characters. You can have more, I won't say show not tell, but you can have more of them thinking about what they're going to do, as opposed to doing it. At the end, you still want them to have action, but you can definitely give a better reason of why. And of course, in a movie, it all has to be move, action. Just make things, because your characters, the actions are your character. Otherwise, you end up with a bad voiceover explaining it or something like that. So that's, I think, that the biggest difference is that you can't as easily get into the psychological makeup of your characters in a screenplay.
It is very difficult to do that, showing what a character's thinking, because voiceovers, I hate them. Watching something like Dune, and I pity the person.
I was just going to say, Dune.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Successfully.
Or another one of my favorites, Blade Runner. where at least they were able to say, well, it's kind of like a film noir, hard-boiled detective thing, but that voiceover, you just, it's painful. Yeah, so show not tell. I mean, that's a very important concept. Could everyone give me an example? So now I'll do mine first so you can think about it. An example of one that did it right. A screenplay, a scene in a movie that without telling you overtly what was happening, they were able to get it across. And a classic story I'll tell while you're desperately trying to think of examples. A Billy Wilder movie, and I cannot remember the title of it. And he came in, they had like 5 pages of this couple bickering just to establish the fact that this was a broken marriage. And they had to cut some stuff out. So he went in there, threw all of that dialogue out, and had a scene where they walk into an elevator, husband and wife. They're standing there. A pretty woman walks in. The guy takes his hat off, and the wife just takes a step away. Boom. I mean, a blind man could figure out what's kind of going on in this, and it got rid of all that stuff. And I like that because when I see something like that, I feel like the filmmaker thinks, is giving me credit for having some smarts. And when they completely spoon feed it to you, I feel like the filmmaker thinks I'm an idiot and has to be told every little thing.
Probably two of the examples that sort of come to the top of my head, of course, and one was a mistake or an ad lib was, Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Harrison Ford shooting the guy with the sword. That in a nutshell pretty much told you anything you needed to know about Indiana Jones. And then probably another one would be the opening 10 minutes of Up.
That's
You just stole my answer.
There you go.
And I was like, okay, now Up, the opening of Up was like perfect.
Yeah.
So you need any dialogue at all. Like, and it actually made me cry. I was like, wow, you can do that much.
You have no soul if that didn't bring a lump to your throat.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Sorry, I stole you.
You stole everything.
Great minds.
Exactly. I was thinking the same thing.
Well, and that speaks there to the power of the screenwriting, because that was one that a bunch of us immediately jumped to.
Yeah.
So it's obvious they got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the ones that came to mind is in Replacement Killers, where Chow Yun-fat's character came up behind Danny Trejo and basically was going to, it was the kill him, and just the nod Danny Trejo did, all right, you got me sort of thing. That's it. And it was just.
So a lot of people, once they find out that you make films and everything, they're way more impressed than they should. But they'll come up to me at conventions and they'll say, I've got a great story. I'm like, okay. And then they tell me a pretty good idea. And I don't want to be that douche nozzle who blah, blah, blah. But I got to point out to him, it's like, that's really cool. It's a really cool idea. So how would you tell the story? How would you get that idea into a story? And it kind of amazes me how many people they actually have a pretty good idea. A lot of times their idea is actually one that's been done to death, but okay. And then it turns out he's a werewolf. Ooh, didn't see that coming. But I've written a few of those myself, so I'm not going to complain.
Or a vampire.
Yeah. I mean, how do you, when you have a good idea, and there's only so many ideas, when you have a good idea, what are the steps you take to take a cool idea and turn it into a story? Like, what do you do next? Do you start making up the characters? Do you start, what are the steps that you go through? You just thought to yourself, blah, 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 blah. Oh, that's a cool idea. What now?
Sometimes it comes down to where the origin of the idea was, because sometimes it is a character. I've got this cool character. Now, what sort of situation can I put him in? As far as if it's a story, though, I tend to, and I used to not do this. I used to pants the hell out of stuff, and I quickly learned that way leads madness. So I've started pretty diligently outlining anymore, and that's kind of the first step is just outlining and getting the bare bones down of the story. And then as you start writing it, I think a lot of times the ideas will develop themselves based on the general outline of where you're going. As long as you know how to get from point A to point B, all the stuff kind of fills itself in if your characters are really flowing and the ideas are going. But that's just me.
Yeah, to be honest, for me, I actually write dialogue last. I don't know. I'm usually more into why am I telling the story? Like you said, is it going to be driven? Is it because of a really interesting character or maybe a cause or a situation I want to convey on screen, or to connect with the audience? And then from there, I'll start being like, all right, how do I show this? And like you said, kind of outlining. And then I always try to add in like really good character descriptions, like for me to really kind of get to know the characters, like make them into whole people. Because those are those pieces that you're able to tell your actors. Well, see, this is the problem with me being a writer director right here. My mind instantly gets into what are some things I can tell about this character that can be conveyed like nonverbal, like or how they think, kind of getting into their mind, and then the dialogue will flow after. So it's like story.
So do you write like a whole background for each character, like even things that in no way, shape, or form show up in the film, but to you it helps understand how the character is?
Yep. Things like what do they eat in the morning? Are they more of a morning person, night person? Create it, like all of that. I started thinking about it.
And you share that with your actors?
Yeah. And then they're able to kind of like, so that actually, we actually have a couple of times in my films where we ad-lib something because that's how the character would think or say. And the audience is like, that was amazing. I'm like, that was ad-lib. So I'm glad you liked it.
And since we're talking about screenwriting, and if I start babbling too much, someone tell me to shut up because I will go forever. But since we are talking about screenwriting, when I say outlining, I think I look at it, act one, the inciting incident. What's going to happen at that 20-minute mark that changes the world as it is and gets the characters involved in whatever's about to happen. Then I'll figure out the second act, and of course the classic, get your characters up a tree and throw rocks at them. And what is the ending of the second act? Where are the characters at their lowest point? What is that? And then of course how it's resolved for the third act, and then the rest of it is just getting, to me, the bulk of it's the second act. Because first act is usually sort of, okay, that's where the story originates. Hey, what if this teacher decided to suddenly start making meth because he has cancer? That there's your first act right there. And then of course when he actually gets that first batch made, suddenly nothing can be the same as it was. And there's your second act. But then to me the hardest part is of course like the great swampy middle in a novel. The second act of getting everybody from that change to the thing that's going to get them redemption at the end. I mean, that's hard. That 80 pages is the hardest.
You bring up Breaking Bad, just marvelously written show, one of my all-time favorites. And it shows, this is something that's kind of changed. In the old days, most television shows, it was an episode and a self-contained story within that episode, and there was no overall arc. Then there were some shows that did have that, but even things like Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere, although there was an overall arc, it was still very much, this was the story of the week, and it may have an influence on later weeks, but there was still, everything was self-contained.
Yeah, even up to X-Files, same way.
Yeah.
Right. I'm wondering,
Babylon 5.
So like Angela, when you're writing a novel, I'm just curious, is that what you try to do with chapters? Do you try to make each chapter kind of be a self-contained, satisfying story in and of itself? Just in case the only thing
you can't.
You want them to keep reading.
And each chapter builds on the one before it. So, but the way I do things is I actually plot it, imagine it in my head. I have imaginary conversations between my characters in my head, or whole scenarios between my characters in my head. And some of the things I've tried to write down, and I'm like, no, I gotta leave this. Because it's like, okay, time to go.
Yeah, I mean, each chapter to me is if I try my best to leave a hook, to force the person to not want to go to bed, to keep reading. I don't always succeed, but usually I can manage it.
Hey, if they're reading it in bed, they've already bought it, so
Well, true.
You've accomplished what you need.
But I want them to enjoy it, so they buy the next one.
Yeah. But I think that's also one reason why a lot of times books don't make great TV shows, because they're trying to tell this whole story, but they have to break it down into chapters, and the chapters may not have been meant to be broken down.
And I think books actually make better TV shows than they do movies.
Yes, I agree.
And there's a lot of that happening
get more into it
with limited series like The Outsiders or The Outsider, and The Last Kingdom is a great example, and that's based on a
Yeah.
series of books.
Mm-hmm.
So that they definitely they are much more compatible as TV episodes than they are as outright novels, because there is so much information. And again, with a TV show, you try and have that hook at the end.
Yeah.
Books do the same thing. So I'm trying to come up with the next book that could be a good limited series so I can steal it.
Yeah. Everyone's looking for the next Game of Thrones. I just binge watched The Witcher. Liked it quite a bit, although, well, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but some of the playing with time was not evident until fairly
late. If you hadn't read the books, like I hadn't read the books, it took a while for me to catch on to what was actually happening. But I really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah. I'm looking forward to the next season, where I imagine the storytelling will be a lot more linear than this one was. But yeah, good stuff. I guess another thing with film. Okay, so being screenwriters, knowing the formulas, knowing what you know, does that change how you watch films now? Like when I'm watching a film, it is so annoying to me how often I guess the big twist, which 9 times out of 10, I wish people would stop doing this. The best friend is the guy who got the hero in trouble in the first place. Whenever the hero is framed or whatever, and he goes to his best friend for help, it's like, that's the son of a bitch who did it right there.
Yeah.
And that's why the cops are going to show up. He's like, what? How'd the cops know to come here? Because that's the guy who framed you, dude. He has no purpose. The best friend's only purpose is either to die or to be the bad guy all along.
Like
both.
Yeah.
Yeah, or both. Usually both.
Yeah. Yes. I definitely, Tony and I will be watching shows and we'll be like, yeah, that rag they just showed us isn't going to come into play later that they stuffed in the gas can.
Yeah.
So we definitely, you see the clues, you know the clues, and I work in film, so that's even worse for me sometimes. I know how they did that.
I know what's coming next. Yeah,
exactly.
I actually ruined a film for a friend of mine. I think it was, I can't remember the name right now. It was one of the Tom Cruise End of the World or something. What's it called? Something like that. When these films was like end of the world kind of films. And I was just like, oh, okay. So like Asha, I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Because I instantly am like, oh, that's how that happened. They're like, stop that. I was like, I'll do that. Or I'll notice something that is like, I'm like, that wasn't.
But at the same time, that makes it great when they do fool you. When you think it's going to go one way and you find out it's not, then that's the gem. You're like, okay, that guy.
I like that one. Yeah.
That you sort of appreciate those even more, I think.
Although sometimes, don't you ever notice something? You'll watch a movie and something is brought up, and you're like, okay, clearly that's going to be a major plot point, and then it never shows up again. You're like, did they edit that out of the film, or
are they just trying to mislead you?
Which feels like a cheat.
Has it ever made you feel mad?
It's all about manipulation,
I think, probably in the editing process, something got left out. And that happens in TV shows too. They'll start down a storyline and realize, we don't really like that one, or it's not going anywhere. And it, obviously people like to shit on Game of Thrones because of the last season, but I didn't hate it as much as a lot of people did, because they were always sort of about upsetting your expectations. So, Cersei didn't die the way we should have. Well, whoever has died the way they should have,
right,
in that show. But one storyline that they did sort of, I think, left off and didn't sort of pursue was in the White Walkers. The whole reason they did those symbols and everything. That just kind of got left by the wayside, and I was always curious about that. So a lot of it, I think, just comes down to the writers lose interest, or sometimes they probably forget, because it's a lot of stuff to keep in your head.
It is. Being in the in the writer's room also too, the next issue is you start getting into a time crunch, and they just believe that the viewers want to see a certain storyline, not realizing for creatives like us who are like, okay, and then what happened? We're waiting for what happens next with some of the pieces left behind. They're like, just move past that, did it, and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
You can certainly understand how a character that may have even been a secondary character just catches fire, and the actor is great and people are responding, and suddenly but it amazes me when you see a show like Lost,
Yeah.
where you really feel like they just painted themselves in a corner.
Yeah.
Like, we'll figure out the ending eventually. It's like, I think maybe you should have had the ending figured out before you started shooting the
Beginning.
pilot.
Yes.
Yeah, I never saw the
Mhm.
show, but certainly from everything I read, yeah, that was one they probably should have had a 5-year plan,
Mm-hmm.
Scandal
or
was
at least an idea of how it was
Yeah.
supposed to end.
With Scandal, they actually for the first lady character, she was supposed to only be there for maybe the first season, maybe half of the first season, but people end up feeling connected with her, and she ended up staying for seasons, to go. So yeah, that's definitely one example of the secondary character that ended up catching on and having a good storyline.
Well, same with Jesse in Breaking Bad. He was supposed to die in the first season.
Yes.
Yeah, or
Wow.
Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yep.
Yeah. What a difference both of those would have made. So have you ever had a character that just ended up being completely different? Or like the character catches fire in you and changes the entire story?
Yeah, I don't know about changes the entire story, but certainly became in my Necromancer series, Corby, the scholar, was just supposed to be sort of the love interest cousin and just sort of was a tag along, but he sort of ended up developing his own personality and having his own wishes and desires, and certainly jumped further to the forefront than I expected him to. So yeah, that happens a lot. I think characters, if they're really living within you, will certainly overtake you and force you to do things you don't necessarily want to do, but they make you.
Ironically, there's actually a short film that I wrote with, actually, this is my similar writing team, it happens. We wrote this story called The Promotion, and it came out really great. We thought it was supposed to be a love story between these two characters, and I played like the comedic relief, and then everyone at the end is like, what happens to Gretchen? So we ended up coming back and like making another short film, and that one did well with Gretchen as a character, and she ends up like making an evil plot and stuff. So that was one of those times where it was almost like a spin-off, you would say. We made our own little spin-off because of audience response. So that was cool.
Now, how many of you written collaborating with somebody? And what are the special challenges in doing that? Christy and I obviously have.
Yes.
And I've collaborated a little bit with Christine.
Yeah.
I prefer it, actually, personally.
Mhm.
I like
Good to have somebody to bounce ideas off of and
We
stuff.
said the same thing, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you have all the characters in your head and they're talking, you're like, please, someone else don't make me look like I'm crazy. At least me while I talk through these ideas. So
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I enjoy collaborating. Steve and I have done it quite a bit now, and of course, helps that we've known each other for over 30 years. So we definitely can. I think the biggest challenge would be, especially maybe necessarily working with someone that you put to work with or haven't worked with much, would just be overcoming ego.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah, I
saying
have
that
that
okay,
problem
maybe
with
my
Bill.
ideas aren't
What?
that.
Oh, that's a
I know
lie.
creatives having egos now. But overcoming the idea that maybe that idea that you thought was the best isn't the best.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Being willing to listen to other people say why.
Right.
Or just
Does
having
there
a
have to,
different perspective. It really helps.
but does there have to be one person in the group, whether it's just two people or a whole group, the one person whose say is the final say? Or is it a democracy, which isn't easy when you have two people?
It depends on the personality types, I think, because you could go in circles forever.
Yeah.
If you don't have somebody that says, okay, we need to stop and just do this.
Well, I mean, when you and I were collaborating, it was always understood you were going to direct the movie. So I'm not so stupid that I think I'm going to win an argument with the director. You can say, yes, Bill, we're going to shoot exactly the way you want. And then comes the day of shooting, you're going to do what you want to do in the first place. So.
Most of our arguments were, no, Bill, we can't have 10 pages of dialogue for this one scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cut it down to 5.
Yeah. No, 2.
Yeah, I think ultimately it does have to someone in a partnership, maybe not as much, because then you sort of deal with the compromise, but certainly in like a writer's room, obviously that's why they have showrunners and head writers. And the same if you're sort of collaborating on a project from a writer-director point of view. I think ultimately it should be either the director or ideally the producer, because they're the ones sort of straddling the business and creative side of it, so they can see both sides from a writing and a directing standpoint and say, okay, this is how it should go based on what I know.
Of course, in our films, the producer is basically anyone who shows up with a couple boxes of donuts.
Okay, well, fair enough.
Is Paul a producer? I didn't think he was the producer.
What's that?
Yeah. Well, don't tell him that. He'll stop bringing donuts. He thinks he's a producer. By the way, if you ever see me looking like I'm panicking or something, it's not because you're saying anything wrong. It's because my cats are running around here like idiots, and they're going to start knocking over things like my handmade ring light and everything else. They're tormenting me right now.
So they're being cats, is what you're
They're
saying.
being cats, and my roof is leaking. It's just everything's falling apart.
Oh, no.
So
Wow.
that's okay.
I was just thinking about the last time when they actually nod on the.
Yes, they pull out the microphone, and I'm like, I'm hitting the mute button. Why can't anyone hear me?
Great.
Cats. I've got a lot of stories that would involve cats. And the only reason they will never be made into movies is that we would have to
Use cats.
Use cats, yeah.
And I'm not going to live long enough.
We made a cat. We made a cat film.
We made 2 cat films.
We did, yes.
Yeah.
It turned out okay.
We made 3 cat films if you include the we had to have a cat drag in a dead rabbit.
Oh, yeah.
And that cat would not leave that actual dead rabbit alone until Christine hit the button and said action. And then that cat just ignored it.
So we had to attach.
You had to duct tape the dead rabbit to the cat's collar to make it look like he was.
You just need to learn how to use After Effects and do CGI cats.
Or all that, yeah.
Yeah, I think a more entertaining movie would be if somebody followed us around and filmed us making our movies.
Yes. Like a behind-the-scenes documentary of us. It'd be hilarious.
So someone comes up to you and says, I want to write movies. What advice do you give them?
Don't. No.
Why?
Yeah.
Because they see us, they see the fame and the glory and the glamour.
If you're going to make a ton of money and become famous, that's not a good reason to do it.
No.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same reason you write, or the same advice I give to someone to say if they want to write a book. Well, write.
Yeah.
Do it.
Start doing it. Yeah.
Butt in seat, hands to keyboard, or pen to paper, whichever.
Pick a time of day that works for you and just sit there and write what comes to your head.
Yeah, and then with screenplays, I'd suggest some good books, about just in general the formatting. Because as we all know, it is sort of its own beast.
Yeah.
It changes, especially if you're trying to do anything in Hollywood or quote unquote professionally. It changes every 5 years the way they want a screenplay written.
Well, that's good advice for writing books or even short stories, because when you're done, you're finished. But with a screenwriter, you can write a great screenplay. I've got stacks of them. They're just sitting there because without a filmmaking team that shares your passion for this story, they're useless. You can't even market them the way you could a short story or book. You could self-publish a book and just say, one day I'll be famous. I'll be dead, but they'll discover this book. But an unproduced screenplay is a paperweight.
Yeah, I mean, unless you can get an agent or a manager, or like you say, a producer who believes in you, it's
or enter it into some competitions or film festivals.
Yeah, screenplay.
Yeah, come to film festivals and you get to meet other producers who might produce.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, so Christine, so if somebody said, I have a screenplay I'd like you to make into a movie, and you're like, yeah, so do I. But what could someone give you? What would be the kind of story that someone would give you? And we have done, I'm thinking of one at least. We have done a screenplay.
One that I know of that somebody did that. Yeah.
Yeah. What would they give? What could they give you that would immediately make you say, I'm going to do this instead of my own stories?
Well, the one that we did was about a person who went to a Mexican restaurant and got possessed by the refried beans and started talking out of their ass. I mean, I've never come up with anything that brilliant.
So what you're saying is they need to have a really sophisticated concept that, a highbrow comedy. Yeah.
Very Downton Abbey-ish.
Unique.
Yes. Very. Definitely an idea that we would not have come up with, or any sane person. Asha, have you had people ask, wanting you to make their stories?
Ironically, it's funny you say that. I actually just had 2 production meetings this week. I'm reading over some scripts. So yeah, it happens often. I definitely would say relationship makes me probably read a little sooner, meaning either I've seen their work before, or I really believe in the cause that they're writing about or something like that. And then from there, I usually read the script and start advising about how I would produce it and talk. So open dialogue about how we can produce films.
Is that pretty flattering to have people, say, I am willing to entrust you with my child, my baby, this screenplay about refried beans that
It really is actually, like you said, or I'm sure Christine can relate, or some of you guys can relate, it's when you're used to producing your own work, so it's definitely, that was like you proving you can do something. And then when people see where it's gone, they're like, okay, I want her to produce this. So it is flattering, but I'm more excited about the stories getting out there.
Yeah.
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 Especially
So
when
the artist.
you create these characters, and if the film doesn't get made, it's like, what happens to them? Yeah,
Yeah.
they're stillborn. Paul, I wanted to ask you, doing commercials. Did you find doing commercials where you have to tell the story in a very short amount of time, has that been good training for the more creative stories that you tell?
No.
That's fine. Yeah.
Because commercials are sort of their own beast. It's a whole different set of skills, because you're right, you do have to get a story out in 30 seconds or hell, 10 seconds anymore sometimes. And it is about selling a product. I mean, some of the same rules apply. You want, the best commercials have a character that someone can sympathize with, or an idea that's unique. I mean, who of us, let's see, we all look like we're moderately close to the same age, with maybe Aisha looks a lot younger than the rest of us. But, the Mean Joe Green commercial from, back in the 70s. I mean, that's, it's a classic. So it definitely still starts with some of the same basic ideas, but the skill sets are different enough that they really don't, other than creating a cool idea, they're totally different. So it's nothing you can really take from one to the other, I don't think. And that's just my personal experience of it.
Yeah, it's definitely more rigid, especially if you're trying to represent a company. So I did corporate content for a while. And I would definitely come out there with outrageous or like ideas I would stand out and be like, oh, what crazy ideas does she have today? And I'm like, I'm trying to help your brand to stand out. That's what people remember the get-go. They remember that, like, they remember certain things and associate with the brand. So you need to work on brand association as much as possible, so then when people see it, like you said, you can grab them in 10 seconds. It's kind of sad, because you come with really cool ideas and they're like, no. You're like, okay.
And having had an advertising agency, she's right. You'll come up with 20 ideas, and if you're lucky, they like 2 of them. And not always the best ones, as far as you're concerned.
Yeah.
Right.
I know. You're like, that's not even the most fun one at all. But okay, we'll produce it. Let's go.
It's hard too, because you're giving them the idea, but you probably actually have, like, you can see the ad in your head, and the trick is, can you
convey,
describe it in words where they can see what you're seeing? If they saw it, they'd probably jump at it too, but words don't always.
We do try to conceptualize, of course, with images or storyboarding or something. We're like, here, this is how it's going to come out. And they're still just like, really get that. I was like,
as always, if you can draw, you have an advantage in life. I'm very envious of those people. But what is the one thing that you think is your strength in screenwriting?
I would say that I'm willing to, I guess, connect with characters or connect with people. So because I put a lot of feeling behind what I write, I think that's what is my strength.
Probably, I think I write a pretty good action scene, a pretty cool action scene that keeps things moving. And since I have a somewhat twisted sense of humor anyway, and every one of my books has at least one smartass character with an offbeat sense of humor, and the jerk. I think I do those characters fairly well. But yeah, definitely, I think action probably kind of stands out for me.
That could be pretty useful.
I think plotting and dialogue. I usually, when I go into something, have a picture of it from beginning to end. of where I can visualize where I want it to go and how the characters are interacting in my head before I put it down to paper. And I do put it down on paper first. I just find it easier for me to write that way.
Mm-hmm.
Flexibility, I guess. I mean, oftentimes I'll have an outline and I'll have it all planned how it's going to go, but you have to listen to your characters and listen to how they actually want it to go. Sometimes it will take you in a completely different direction, but you're being true to the characters that you're creating.
Real fast, your favorite filmmaker from a screenwriting point of view? Tarantino.
Robert Rodriguez.
That's a tough one because there's so many good ones.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's you conflate the director with the screenwriter.
This is true.
They're very rarely the same person.
Or maybe let's say a filmmaker who has the good wit to always work with excellent screenwriters. So when you go to see one of their films,
there you go.
You know you're going to get a good story.
Okay. With a few exceptional misfires, I'd say Steven Spielberg, or Martin Scorsese. Yeah, I mean, which obviously are the two, choices that everybody's going to make, but they're top of their game for a reason.
Well, classic Hitchcock,
Yeah.
I've always loved his stories.
Mm-hmm. Probably a more offbeat one, I would say, would be Charlie Kaufman.
Mm-hmm.
Being John Malkovich and
that
sort of thing, or Wes Anderson.
And more recently, in horror, Jordan Peele. I mean, you don't know what you're going to get, but it's going to be well told. Yeah,
it's going to be something different and unusual, no doubt. And this is completely off the cuff, but just from a strictly screenwriting standpoint, I'd say one of the best things out there right now, oddly enough, is Rick and Morty. Yes. Because it's Nebula Award-worthy sci-fi stories.
Absolutely,
with jokes.
Brilliantly written. Folks, I'm getting the old wrap-up sign here. So quickly, I know the answer to this is probably not what we all want, but when things get back to whatever the new normal will be, what are some of the upcoming projects that you all have planned?
I'll be working on a pilot as the script supervisor, which is my day job, script supervisor and props. So I'll be working on a pilot for a friend of mine who's self-funding it about angels and demons. So
nice.
Yeah.
I'll be working on a short film called a Night Out. Meeting Place is the other one, which a friend of mine is directing for the Sick Chicks anthology.
Both good stories.
Yeah, and so I'm going to be helping these ladies make their films, Sick Chick Productions. We've got like 7 short films that everybody's written and are going to direct. So cool. That's my next thing.
Working on a feature, Rose is Not a Flower. That's more like a feel-good, family-friendly film. It's usually my niche. 2 other comedic short films, 1 sci-fi short, and then also an Untitled. I can't say it yet. We're gonna that actually was on the writing team for. We had to move our filming.
Yeah.
Over to October.
I think everybody did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right?
Are y'all taking advantage of this nightmare to get some ideas down and things?
Oh hell yeah.
Good. Good. So some good will come of it. Folks, thank you all so much for being here. This is just a really talented group of people. I really look forward to seeing what you're going to come out with. I know some of the ones here because I'm working with them, and there's some good stuff on the horizon. I just hope when things do kind of get back to normal, there's just an explosion of all this creativity that's been pent up. We'll go from having way too much time on our hands to not enough time on our hands to keep up with it.
Exactly. That'd be great.
Keeping me
I'd be
going.
fine with that.
But thank you all very much.
Thanks. Take care.